Today, we will discuss a very important subject. It is about how to write and publish a scientific paper. We have very distinguished presenters, and I will invite them to enlighten us about the different steps of writing and publishing a paper. We will start by Dr. Massine El-Hammoumi, who is the professor of thoracic surgery, Mohammed Al Khamis University Hospital, Rabat, Morocco, and he will speak to us about the ethical issues for medical research and data collection. So I invite Professor Massine to start our meeting.
Inshallah, marhaban. So I will begin from the beginning. We will discuss two topics, ethical issues and the data collection. So first of all, we say in the literature of in the poetic literature, as said Ahmed Shawqi, إنما الأمم الأخلاق ما بقيت فإنهم ذهبت أخلاقهم ذهبوا. لا بأس في إعادة هذا البيت الشعري. This is so important to say that ethics is the most important thing in civilizations. So all professions are guided by a code of ethics, and this code will accommodate the change in ethics, the values, and the needs and expectations of professionals. If we look for the word ethical in the Collins Dictionary, we'll find that it is correct principles of conduct of a given profession or group. So ethics are the norms to distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Ethics should uphold things with value. Ethics are us. The worst competitor, unfortunately, of ethics is money, the funding body. Which time we have money in a question, it's money that wins. When it is sponsoring the research, it can affect the research. We'll see this later. In the same definitions, research ethics related to the research is the application of fundamental ethical principles to a variety of scientific research topics. So, education and monitoring of a scientist population is the way to conduct a research with respect of ethical standards. The question is why we should respect ethics. First of all, when we respect ethics, we will go away from harm to the participant. No harm for the participant, like what happened in 1933 and 1945 on prisoners by exposing them to high altitudes, malaria, poisons, untested drugs, and operations without anesthesia. And this harm was included in this medical experiment, so it is not acceptable. Second reason for respect of ethics is we should respect other researchers. So the rule is respect for other researchers. The third one is professional requirement. It is important to respect ethics to have a professional stature. And another reason is funding obtention. We should respect ethics to get funding. If we fail to respect ethics, we will get rejection from the research community. So the history of development of ethical codes in the world, it begins in 1947 by the Nuremberg Code, and after it is Helsinki Declaration in 1965. Until 2002, we get through the Council of International Organizations of Medical Science. This diapositive resume and give the abstract of the two codes, Nuremberg and Helsinki Declaration, and we arrive to what are the basic principles of research ethics. This is an important diapositive. So first of all, we begin by the respect for colleagues. After it's honesty, confidentiality, non-discrimination between the participants. We should respect the intellectual property of the others. We should respect integrity and objectivity of the data. We should all the time stay careful about the study and the research. Social responsibility and openness is another basic principles. In this diapo, we will discuss the important areas in research ethics. We have the authorship, the peer review, plagiarism, research misconduct, and research with animals or human subjects. Authorship, in the definition, each research is a collaboration, is a fruit of collaboration and assistance between experts and colleagues. And the authorship mission is to know whose names a research paper belongs. It is a question of responsibility. So authorship is reserved for persons who receives primary credit and hold the full responsibility. So the authorship will decide which colleagues should be listed as authors or co-authors. It is important because it will make problem between the authors, between the colleagues. So it is an occasion to work hard about this authorship to know the exact responsibility of each one. Authors significantly contribute to the research and the writing of the manuscript. Authors prepare the full responsibility of the content of the research article. But co-authors contribute, of course, substantially to the research. They wrote and they revise all or a part of the manuscripts, and they finally approve the version of the entire article. We arrive to the plagiarism. Plagiarism in Arabic, we can say الانتحال. اقتباس كتابة أو عمل أو فكرة من شخص والادعاء على أنها ملك للشخص الذي اقتبسها. Presenting words, phrases, ideas, or work of another author, including facts and statistics, and say it is mine. It was first described in 60,001 by the dramatist Ben Jonson and called it the literary theft, السرقة الأدبية. The first one to do in the literature was Polish astronomer Nicolaus Copernicus in his famous book on the revolutions of the celestial spheres. Actually, it was from the book of the Arabic scientist Ibn Shatter. So the plagiarism will question the integrity, the ethics, and trust the worthiness of the researcher. الجدارة العلمية. Is it done intentionally or unintentionally? Plagiarism is not anymore tolerated by the scientific community. More than 500 articles were discussing the plagiarism in the Medline database, and from 2013 to 2023, more than 300 articles discuss the same thing. We take the example of our colleagues in Egypt about the medical plagiarism, and we see here what are the forms of plagiarism. Plagiarism of ideas, when we theft a new idea of a theory from anywhere, and the plagiarist conducts the research based on this idea or theory and without acknowledgement of the source. Plagiarism of text, this is the most known form of plagiarism with the copycat paste or word-to-word writing. And this occurs when a researcher takes an entire paragraph from another source. Self-plagiarism, it occurs when a researcher uses his own results in two different publications. Collusion, in Arabic, التواطؤ, asking someone else to write a piece of work for the plagiarist, who then presents it as his own work. The last form is the patch reading, when we try to copy parts of another work and we will play by words and to try to make words in different order and make it appear as an original form. What are the causes of plagiarism? The first one, we should always believe in people. People say that when we use complete text of another article, we mention the reference at the end. There is no problem. This is the misbelief. This is plagiarism. This is always a copycat paste method. So it is refused in the ethical community. The second cause is intentional plagiarism, and it's very bad. The third cause is poor time management by researchers and writing under stress. It's a problem. The researcher don't have time and will use plagiarism to get fast and to go to the end fast. Another reason is immature writing skills, especially in scientific population where people are not speaking the scientific language like English, and they will have a lot of skills, a lot of problems to write in English. And this scientific language is continuously developing, and it is difficult for them to write in this foreign language for them. Another reason is the enormous pressure on researchers with the famous rule, publish or perish. To publish is used to get fans, clearly, and we'll publish to prove that we have academic competency. We will get published to maintain our career or to get better posts. So all of these reasons don't give you the right to have and to do plagiarism. A comedy on a Committee on Publication Ethics, COP, was created in 1997 with a huge guidelines for publication ethics in all over the world. So what are the ethical guidelines anti-plagiarism? We should accurate our notes when doing each research. We should educate ourselves about the university plagiarism policies. When we try to cite sources, we have to master the procedure, how to do, and we should learn to young researcher how to do paraphrase. Paraphrase is the way to get the text without borrowing the same language or the same structure. And it is a legal way to use the information. After the plagiarism, we have the peer review. The peer review is a process made before a paper will be published in a scientific journal. And it is a way to ensure that only high quality papers and reliable informations will be published in a scientific journal. So what are the steps in the peer review? The author, you know this all, the author will begin by the choose of a scientific paper, and he will submit this paper to the editor of the scientific journal. The editor will choose viewers in this specific topic of the manuscript, and he will submit the paper to those researchers to make a specific independent recommendations about this manuscript. And depending on these recommendations, they have to speak about the problem of processing charge or fees. It is a factor that impacts the acceptance of or the reject of the paper sometimes. There are some rules for the reviewer. The reviewer should not know the author to make objectivity. The editor should not tell the names of the reviewers, and the information in the article cannot publicly disclosed in this process. Another area is the research with animals. Animals are used in testing new medicines or teaching tools for medical students or as an experimental subject, and they can be only used when we have no alternative, when it is absolutely necessary, when this experiment will advance the scientific knowledge, and we should treat animals humanly. We use the right word, humanly. This experiment should not be repeated because animals do not have any way to express their suffering. When the research is done with the human subjects, with a living individual on whom a research investigator will obtain the data through intervention or interaction with the individual. This is the most important dipole in this presentation about ethical guidelines. We should respect the benefits. Benefits should be higher than the cost. The protection from physical, mental, and emotional harm for participants. The protection of privacy, life, and well-being. The right to end the participation research at any time. The right to access to information regarding the research for the participants, not their families. The obtained informed consent, written informed consent, the respect for people, the right to safeguard the integrity, and finally, the voluntarity. The research misconduct is the process of identifying and reporting unethical or unsound research. It is falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or even in reporting research results. It must be committed intentionally. In this case, we should have an inquiry, a correct investigation, and after take the decision to make an appropriate corrective action. We finish with the ethical guidelines, and we begin the data collection. The definition of a data, the term data refers to any kind of information researchers obtain on subjects, respondents, or participants of the study. So it is the basic unit of information from which other measurements and analysis can be done. Data is one of the most important and vital aspects of any research study. So what are the types of data? Data can be quantitative, and it is usually manipulated by mathematics, or a qualitative data, variables, a conceptual like gender, man or woman. Ordinal data, numbers, they are numbers but used in score, like when say, for example, performance statue, 0, 1, 2, 3, are numbers, they are speaking about a situation. And last, signal data. Signal data is a quantitative in nature, but it is treated as qualitative, like in echocardiogram. How important is the collection of data? So data collection in the definition is the collection of information about study objects, about subjects or participants. This is important to understand. Data collections is not only subjects. It can be about objects, about participants or others. So it includes documents review, observation, questioning, measuring, or a combination of different methods. So accurate and systematic data collection is a real critical step to conduct a good scientific research. We should get some considerations. When the data collection and management is poor, you can render a perfectly executed trial useless. And better data practices carry resource and ethical costs, not only money. So we should have some reflex, some good practices, and to respond to some questions. What are the targeted data? How are they represented? How are they stored for retrieval and use? Do we respect objectivity, reproducibility, and reliability? So some factors should be considered before the beginning of the collection of data. You should precise and identify the objectives and the scope of the inquiry, the research question, and usually we should have one sentence description study. We should get the type and the accessibility of the source of information. We should know how it is the quantitative expression to make measurements and scales. And we should control the techniques of data collections and the units of collection. So this is the strategy of collection of data. After the control of data requirements, we will see the source information to have money budget, and after we will determine the source of data. Data collection design is the next step, and finally, it is the data acquisition plan. We will see how to get the source information and how to make a good data acquisition plan. The source of information can be twice: internal source of information or external source. Internal source, it is from proper and regular activity reports by routine surveillance, by hospital records, and it is usually no extra cost way to get information. Therefore, external source, it is obtained outside. It can be a primary or a secondary data. We will see this. It is obtained by census or sampling, and it is always costly. Primary data in the external source is the collection of data from a first-hand experiences, first time, in real time, authentic, and it is not yet published. It is objective and reliable. In French, we say fiable, reliable. We trust it. Greater validity than secondary data, and it is not changed by the human being and the human mistakes. Methods of collection of primary data is, first, the direct personal investigation, interviewing, observation, indirect oral investigations, case studies, medical case studies, what we do, measurement, laboratory tests, experimentation. But primary data have some advantages and some disadvantages. Advantages: targeted issues are addressed, best interpretations of the information with a high accuracy, precision of data, and greater control of the results. But it is consuming cost, time, personal energy, you need resource, you have no feedback, and it needs a training skills and laborious work. Secondary data already collected by others in the past, by the journal publications, official records, international publications, by the government, by the institutions, by corporations, published or not. And this secondary data can resort to the primary data of others. And this method is really rarely accessible. Secondary data have some advantages. They are quickly done and cheap about the cost. They represent a wider geography area with a longer period orientation in time, and they can rarely lead to the primary data. But some demerits or disadvantages is the specific research need is missing. We don't have a precise answer to some questions. Poor accuracy, the precision, not up to date all the time, with a poor accessibility. If you want to compare the primary data and secondary data, I said that primary data is in real time, precise answer to research question, via eviction, human mistakes, more flexible studies, but the secondary data are in the past and we're not sure about the source. It is really cheap and no time consumption, but we have some via in statistics, and it is a less flexible way. So coming back to this strategy, we arrive to the data acquisition plan, how to do. The data acquisition or collection plan begin by the identifications of types of data, the precise research question, hypothesis, the making of type of measurements or variables, quantitative or qualitative, and then we go to instruments and scales. Before all, get the written permissions of the participants. And after, we will pilot testing. My friend, later we speak about this, maybe. After the pilot testing, maybe sometimes we'll go to make a revision and go back to the types of the data in this place. But when the study is done, good results, we go to the data collection forms and we make the operational procedures, we make the results, and we begin the implementation in Arabic at Tanfid. So what are the challenges in data collection process? First of all, fragmented data. It is a perplexing sources that make the data fragmented and it is difficult to make them together. Secondly, data are ever-changing. It is impossible to get complete data clean and currently. So sometimes we have some dry or what we call dormant data. Privacy and security regulations is difficult to respect in collection data, and patient expectations is difficult to respond in this process. We will speak about the concept of, just a word about the concept of metadata. Metadata is the data about the data. Sometimes before using any information, the maker of a decision will ask more questions about the information. Where does it come from? How it was calculated? When was it last updated? What are the precautions to take? And any more questions. So temporal metadata require particular attention to understand the applications of time in the process of collecting data. This diapo about the purposes of metadata. To respect the time, I will not spend more time. And last, we will just mention the concept of big data, which is the industrial revolution and the informational revolution thanks to internet and the engineering and technology. In conclusions, the moral quality of a medical ethicist begins when no one is watching except Allah. The researcher should understand that he must make an integral professional activity and must ethically discharge his research. So training should be provided in case of deviations. And about the collection data, it is a decisive step in medical research and needs an organized teamwork and good level of communication. وشكرا لكم زملاء الأعزاء على حسن الإصغاء. السلام عليكم.
I think we would keep the discussion till the end of the meeting. But before going to the next presenter, I would personally like to thank Professor Hamoumi for this enlightening presentation. He gave us those that we needed about the ethics. Ethics are the most important step in research. I totally agree with you, sir. I only disagree in one detail, that the problem of ethics is not money. The problem of ethics is ourselves, is our greed. If we are, because we are greedy, we are tempted by money. If you are not, we'll become immune to money. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for this enlightening presentation. And I will call on our second presenter, my friend, Dr. Ahmed Habib, the thoracic surgeon consultant in New Cross Hospital, Wolverhampton, UK. Dr. Ahmed, you are invited to take the stage and present us your talk about medical statistics.
Okay, thank you very much. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum. All right. So, statistics for medical papers. The aim of today's talk is not to make you a statistician who is experienced in the laborious equations of statistics. When you start doing a driving test, you learn how to use the steering wheel and the gearbox. You don't really know what's under the bonnet. And that's what I hope I can achieve by the end of this talk, just to get you driving at the steering wheel to write a paper at the end. We're going to talk to an extent about univariate analysis and Kaplan-Meier curves. And these are almost going to be definitely used in all your papers. Multivariate analysis and propensity score matching are used only in some papers, and we'll just touch on those without going into deep details. So let's take this example of a paper where we want to have a look at our data over the last 3 years and whether the patients that had and not lung cancer on their radiological diagnosis were upstaged post-operatively, comparing two groups. Our control group is considered to be the video-assisted surgery group, and our test group is considered to be the robotic-assisted surgery group. You get your master sheet prepared, and this is just a few columns of the master sheet. One of the columns on the right-hand side is the approach, and that column will be used to discriminate between your control and your test group. The rest of the columns will have either qualitative data like gender, where it's not continuous, it's not in numbers, male, female, performance status 0, 1, 2, 3. These are qualitative data, or they may have continuous data or quantitative data like the age or the body mass index or the serum creatinine level. All these are numbers. Now, it is very important to understand the difference between them so that we use the right test for the right variable. And I'll talk about that in detail. Now, statistics is all about comparing two groups. And if the two groups are different by more than 1/20, then there is not a chance that there is any similarity between them, and they are statistically significantly different. And we'll talk about that when we come to each variable. Let's start talking about univariate analysis. Now, when you have a variable, you ask yourself a question. Is it qualitative, like gender, or quantitative, like age? And then you need to ask yourself a second question. Is the quantitative data normally distributed, or is it skewed? And that will let you know which test you need to use. Most of the univariate analysis will use one of these three tests, and I'll give you an example about each. For gender, for example, which is probably the most common qualitative data, which is probably the most common form of data you will find on your master sheet, you use the chi-square test. The chi-square test compares between percentages and ratios. So in our example, the number of females to males, VATS versus RATs, is as you can see here. The robotic-assisted group had an equal number of females and males. The VATs had a very slightly higher percentage of females. But when we put that in the chi-square test, it gave us a p-value of 0.52, which is not significant. Not significant means that the data is similar, that the variable between the control and the test group is similar. There's no difference. And for preoperative data, this is good because that means you're comparing two groups that have similar data. If they were dissimilar, for example, you had too many males, then you would be biased towards that group that has males, because most of the time females have a poorer outcome. Okay? Now, what about if you have a numerical value? Then you ask yourself an extra question. Are the numbers distributed equally and normal distribution or Gaussian Bell distribution? If that is the case, then the mean is the best number to represent that group of patients. Or are the patients distributed in a skewed, positively or negatively skewed form? If they are, then a mean will not represent the patients nicely. And a median is a better way to represent them. Now, tests that discriminate between the variables by mean are very different to tests that discriminate the data by median. And that's why you need to know if your group is Gaussian distribution, normal distribution, or skewed distribution. Now, if they are normal distribution, you compare them by the mean and you use two standard deviations to represent the data, because two standard deviations will represent 95% of the data you've got. If you only take one standard deviation, then you're missing out almost 1/3 of your data, okay? That's why we use two standard deviations. If you use a median, then you automatically discriminate the population into 4 groups and you use the middle two, which is called the interquartile range. And that represents the maximum amount of patients under the curve. So you get the better representation of that particular variable. let's take an example to make this easy. So I like to look at the data using something called QQ-plot. So I put the variable, both the test and the control group, in one column. I put it on the statistical package I use, whether it be SSPS or MedCalc or whatever you flavor, and you tick the statistics box drop-down menu, and you look, you search for the distribution plot, normal distribution plot, and you tick the box of a QQ plot, and it will draw your population, your variable, along that line. If the population or the variable is very close to the QQ plot, that means they are normally distributed, and you can use the tests for normal distribution. But if they come to one side, like this side, that means that they're skewed, and you have to use the tests particular for skewed distribution, and we'll come to those in a second. So for normal distribution, we use the most common and popular test is the t-test. For skewed distribution, we use something called, usually we use the Mann-Whitney test. There are other tests, but the most common is the Mann-Whitney test. So when I put down the age variable on the QQ plot, it showed a Gaussian distribution or a normal distribution. So I used the t-test, and we had a sample size of 96 robotic cases and 82 VATS cases. The arithmetic mean, as you can see here, it compares the mean of the two groups, was 74.46, the age of those patients, and the mean of the VATS group was 72. It gives you the standard deviation, but you know that you want two standard deviations. So when you come to write that in your table, you will multiply the 8.6 by 2 and put it between two curves in order to represent your data properly. And it also tells you at the bottom of the table the p-value. And the p-value here is 0.2, which means that the two groups were very similar with regards to age. If the p-value was less than 0.05, that means one of the groups was much older or much younger than the other group. But for preoperative data, as we mentioned, a similarity is a good thing, because that means you're comparing similar populations with regards to that preoperative variable together. You're not biased towards a younger age, for example. Okay? Now, if the population is skewed, as we found in our BMI cases, most of them were a little bit on the obese side, okay? Then what we need to do is to compare them by the median, okay? So the median between sample 1 was our RATS group and sample 2 was our VATS group. The median for the RATS group was 27. The median for the RATS group was 27. For the VATS group was 26. And here we don't use the standard deviation. We use the interquartile range to tell us and give us an idea about the range of the body weight of those patients. And as you can see, again, they were statistically similar. They were not different. And that's a good thing for preoperative measure. And you go through your master sheet variable by variable, and you write a table that looks like this. Variable by variable, you put the table describing each of your groups, the test group and the control group, and you put the p-value, and the readers can find out what your population looks like and understand where you're heading to. Now, as you can see here, all the variables, all the preoperative variables were all non-significant, okay? Including their lung function, COPD, comorbidities, diabetes, everything. They were very similar. Then you go to the pathological data of the patient. So these are the post-op findings on the histopathology reports. And again, we found that they were very similar in groups. And the patients, some of them had been upstaged on their nodal stages to N1 and some to N2, and the majority remained at N0. And we'll look at this more closely because the aim of our study was to see how many patients were upgraded, okay? Finally, you start to look at other variables, intraoperative variables, and after that, you look at post-operative variables. And usually this part of your univariate analysis is very important because this talks about your outcomes. How many patients had a complication, how many patients needed to go to the intensive care unit, how many patients needed dialysis, and so forth, and how many patients died. In our groups, they were all similar, and there was no difference in the outcomes and the comorbidities and complications after the operation, whether it be RATS or VATS. Now, that's the end of the univariate analysis. After that, in most of the tests, you want to see comparing the control group with the test group, their longer-term survival, their in-hospital survival and their longer-term survival. So usually you're comparing, for example, in our group, it was VATS versus RATS, which is both surgery, but sometimes you compare, for example, stents versus CABG. So an percutaneous intervention versus a surgical intervention. Or in other instances, we may be comparing chemotherapy and radiotherapy versus surgery. So you're comparing two groups with different treatments, and you want to know the longer-term survival of these patients. And for that, you have to use something called Kaplan-Meier. And Kaplan-Meier uses survival curves and also gives you an extra test, which I'll mention in a second. So what are the input data that you need in order to get your survival? You need to calculate in your Excel sheet how many months or days the patients lived after the operation. And that's a very easy way to do it on your Excel. And it gives you the months or days, whichever you choose. And then you need to find out whether those patients survived till the end of your follow-up period. In our case, it was 17 months, or they died in the middle. And you mentioned that in ones or zeros. And the Kaplan-Meier needs to know what you're comparing with. In our case, it was RATS versus VATS, the factor you're comparing with. You enter all those three into the as an input data for your Kaplan-Meier, and this is what you get out of it. You get out of it the number of events, the percentages of mortalities, and the numbers that survived, which obviously is very good because all these patients was N0, but actually it was exceptionally better than the published data on the lung cancer study group, which we're very, very proud to show. And we'll be presenting hopefully next month in the SCTS. You're more than welcome to come and visit the UK, and hopefully we can meet, inshallah, face to face. And it also gives you a curve. And I'm sure all of you have seen this curve. This is the Kaplan-Meier curve. And sometimes they put notches on it, which represents a death in any of the groups. I didn't prefer to have those in my curve. I just took it out. And you can see that the two curves are very close together. But are the outcomes similar or not? Are they statistically different or not? Most statistical packages in the Kaplan-Meier curve will also offer you an extra test called the log rank test, and that tests the significance of survival. And in our case, as this curve showed, they were not significantly different. So the survival between VATS and RATS was very similar. And that's not very surprising because robotic-assisted surgery for lung cancer is only more advantageous when you're doing segmentectomies, when you're doing complex sleeves, where the wristed instruments are much more beneficial. But if you're talking about a routine day-to-day lobectomy, then obviously there's not much difference. Now we'll talk a little bit about multivariate analysis. Now, multivariate analysis uses something called logistic regression. You don't really need to know the details of these descriptions, but you do need to understand that when there is a difference in the outcomes, which wasn't the case in our study, the outcomes were very similar. But if I had a very different mortality between the two groups, or a very different hospital stay or ITU admission, I would like to know which variable affected it. Was there something in the preoperative or intraoperative data that made a difference? And how did they interact together? So let's say, for example, in my data, I had a very different age group or very different length of stay or procedure or instrument that I use intraoperatively, or multiple factors like kidney disease, diabetes, or whatever. I would like to see the interaction between all these variables that were different with the outcome here on any of these outcomes and any of these variables. So I would enter whether it be survival in time if I'm comparing mortality, or sometimes it would be something like hospital stay or dialysis, yes or no, to an endpoint, and the different variables that will interact together. Sometimes these variables are not all statistically significant. They don't have to be all less than 0.05. I may prefer to put patients that were slightly less significant. For example, patients that were 0.06 or 0.1, and remove the variables that were above that. And I can choose that here. And the way I enter the data also can be chosen. There are 4 ways to enter the multivariate analysis. There's something called forward, backward, stepwise, or individual variables. And usually you choose all of them and you try your multivariate analysis with all 4, and you see the outcomes. And here is where your role as a specialist in the field draws some conclusion based on the different outcomes of the different types of multivariate analysis and common sense. Common sense does play a role with multivariate analysis. because I didn't need to use multivariate analysis in my study, I got you an example for patients that had gallbladder stones who were treated by medically, and whether the outcome was favorable or not. And they put a number of variables inside, and they found that the period of the disease where they followed up the gallstones with the medicine and the number of gallstones were the two factors that determined the outcome of treatment for gallbladder stones. Now, this is something that you would put in at the end of your study and draw conclusions out for your paper if need be. Not all papers will have multivariate analysis in them. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, do I have some time to talk about propensity scoring? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think we have a few more minutes. Okay. Propensity scoring is something that became a lot more like a fashion back in the 1990s. And towards the last 10, 15 years, it's become very, very important in cardiothoracic studies. And in short, a propensity matching is a way to make your retrospective study as powerful as possible, as close as possible to a randomized controlled study. How do you do that? Basically, what you do is, for example, this is another study we're working on where we're giving some of our patients perioperative fluids and other patients were not given perioperative fluids. They were just starved all night, went to theaters, and then woken up in theaters and later on started oral drinking when they were safe to. They were not given any IV fluids, while the other group of patients were given fluids perioperatively during the starvation period and post-operatively. And we had a group of 261 patients, and we propensity matched them by age, sex, and anatomical lung resection to make sure that they were similar. And with the propensity matching, we excluded 11 dissimilar patients, and we had 2 equal groups of 125 each. So the propensity matching is present in SSPS. It is not present in MedCalc. It is present on a free program, but you'll need to learn how to program R, which is available online for free, but you need a computer programmer or you'll need to learn it yourself in order to use it. And you can use any variables to propensity score your group, and you can match them. You choose the degree of matching, whether they're exactly similar at 1 or they're slightly similar at 0.5 or even less. In our case, we chose 0.5 and we excluded 11 cases, which were bizarre. And we compared the rest of the patients, which were 125 group each. So this draws my talk, and I'm happy to take questions. I believe they will be at the end. Thank you very much for listening. It's a great opportunity to see you all. And hopefully we can meet in some of the talks and conferences, inshallah.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. I'm always impressed by those who touch some terrifying subjects like statistics in the clear and simple way that you did. Thank you very much for this clear and simple presentation of a tough subject, how to use medical statistics in research. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, again. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
Okay, salam.
We'll start again. I'm happy to introduce my friend, Dr. Hussein Al-Khayyat. Dr. Hussein Al-Khayyat is the Assistant Professor of Cardiothoracic Surgery in Al Saud University. He's a Fellow of the European Board of Thoracic Surgeons. Dr. Hussein, I have to admit that he's one of the most active professors in the Egyptian universities, in all the Egyptian universities. I'm happy to introduce him to talk to us about a very interesting subject. It's how to write a paper, especially the discussion section.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. شكرا دكتور أحمد وشكرا الجمع الكريم. سعيد بوجودي مع حضراتكم النهاردة. شاكر تقديم الزملاء الأفاضل كانوا قبلي وفروا عليها حاجات كتيرة، وهي دي very informal presentation. أنا أحاول هي مصرية أو عربية زيادة عن كونها very formal presentation، وأنا عملتها بالشكل ده عشان نقدر إن إحنا نبقى بنكلم بيها الناس زي ما دكتور عامر قال اللي بيجهز رسائل ماجستير أو دكتوراه أو بيحاول إن هو يجهز research for the first time. فسامحوني لو كان فيها شوية تسهيل سريع زيادة، لكن إن شاء الله تكون مفيدة للجميع. دايما المشكله في المانuscript رايتنج هنبتدي منين وهنعمل ايه. انا هجو ثرو النقط الاساسيه سريعا، وهنعمل special emphasize on the discussion section باعتبار ان هو ده احنا يعني في الاغلب بيبقى اصعب جزء بيتعبنا في الكتابه بتاعته او المجهود بتاعه. لكن هنبتدي من الاول بالانترودكشن. الانترودكشن بتاعه البيبر او هي المدخل والحاجه اللي الناس بتبص لها في الاول لو احنا استبعدنا الجزء بتاع الابستراكت. كل جزء او سيكشن في المانuscript المفروض ان هو بيجاوب على سؤال او بيقول احنا الجزء ده معمول ليه وايه الفايده منه. في الانترودكشن وان كان المثل يعني اوت شويه لكن هو بالظبط اللي مكتوب عند حضرتك في الصوره ده. هو احنا في ايه مشوارنا الجلي؟ احنا محتاجين ان احنا to tell the reader why the research was started, make a clear question that the research was designed to answer, what question the research was designed to answer, raise the interest of the reader. لازم اجذب انتباهه ولازم اخليه يحاول ان هو يكمل المانuscript ويقراها سواء هو ريفيور الاديتور او ريدر للمجله. وعشان اعمل الكلام ده لازم المفروض ان انا اجاوب على الاربع نقط دول. الانترودكشن في العادي السؤال المهم اللي هي المفروض ان هي تجاوب عليه هو احنا عملنا ليه هذا الريسيرش من الاساس؟ ايه الاهميه؟ المفروض ان انا بوفر للي بيقرا باك جراوند عن كونتكست بتاع الاستدي. مثلا لو احنا بنتكلم عن لان كانسر فان ده leading cause of death والبرسنتج او الانسيدنس بتاعه وورد وايد، اوفر معلومات عن هذا النقط. المفروض ان انا بعد كده اديله النولج اون ذا توبيك. لو احنا بنتكلم على سيرجري في لان كانسر فهقول له ايه الحاجات اللي عندي وايه الاوتكمز وايه النقط اللي احنا لقيناها. justify the need for the study او في بعض الناس بتسميها gap of knowledge، الحته اللي احنا مش عارفينها في الموضوع او كده، ان احنا لو استخدمنا this technique will give more satisfying results مثلا، او هو ده النقطه اللي فيها المشكله، او دي دايما مثلا البوست اوبراتيف بين وحش جدا في العيانين دول، فاحنا محتاجين حاجه نشوف البوست اوبراتيف بين. provide information on the study objectives and hypotheses. بقى الفرضيه بتاعتي ان انا لو استخدمت هذا التكنيك او استخدمت هذه الطريقه ده هيحسن لي البين for those patients. فالمفروض ان انا اغطي هذه النقط. خلينا نعمل تدريب سريع. لو قلت لحضراتكم عاوزين حد يكتب لنا introduction سريعه نقولها بسرعه عشان الوقت عن introduction section لبيبر هتتكلم على 60-year-old men giving a 60-year-old man a cup of a green tea every day reduce their risk of lung cancer. فحد ممكن يقول لنا كده ممكن نكتب ايه في الانترودكشن سيكشن لو هو عندنا manuscript بهذه التفصيله. لو انا هنا هتكلم هقول ان lung cancer is a leading cause of death وان هو most of the time carcinogens اللي بتتكون من السموكينج انفايرمنتس، والكارسينوجينز دي ده الباك جراوند اللي احنا شرحناه. وبعد كده هرجع اقول له النقطه اللي بعدها المفروض ان انا اقول له justify need for this study ان احنا despite the if to compete smoking or improve الانفايرمنت لكن ما زال لان كانسر عدد الحالات فيه اكبر وكتيره. فهنا الفرضيه بتاعتي ان انا لو استخدمت حاجه انتي اوكسيدنت زي جرين تي which is cheap and affordable ممكن اقلل الريسك. فدي الفرضيه بتاعتي. يبقى شكل الانترودكشن المفروض ان انا احطها في هذه الحاله المفروض ان هي تكون بهذا الشكل او بهذه الكيفيه. طيب لو ده الانترودكشن احنا قلنا احنا هنجو ثرو نقط سريعه وهنركز على الدسكشن. فخلينا ننقل من الانترودكشن دلوقتي للميثود. الميثودز هي الطريقه اللي احنا عملنا بيها، واحنا دايما بنحب نسميها ساعات بالعربي الطريقه والمقادير زي بتوع الطبخ. فالمفروض ان انا بدي اللي جاي ورايا او اللي بيقرا البيبر بتاعتي a detailed exposition of the research design. المفروض ان لو الريدر قرا الميثود section should be able to repeat the study and to validate the finding. A method section less than two double space page is probably inadequate. ده في معظم الليترشر القديمه كانوا بيشوفوا ان لازم كل الديتيلز. طبعا هنا اللي نقصده في الميثودز كل الديتيلز بما فيها مين الستادي بوبيليشن، المكان اللي هنعمل فيه الستادي، السامبل سايز كالكوليشن، الميثود اوف راندمايزيشن اف اني. بعد كده المفروض النقط اللي احنا الايثيكال ابروفال، الانفورمد كونسنت، والداتا تو بي كولكتد، والداتا دي يتحط لها how it was collected، والستاتستيكال باكج اللي استخدمت كمان عشان تعمل كل هذه التفاصيل زي الكتب بتاعه الطبخ كده. الطريقه والمقادير كل نقطه فيهم عملناها ازاي. ايفن في بعض النقط لو احنا بنشرح a conventional approach like median sternotomy فانا بكتفي بان انا بقول بعمل المرضى دول median sternotomy. لكن لو انا بشرح more innovative technique مثلا like uniportal rats for example، فانا ده موصوف في حاجات قليله، فالمفروض ان انا احدد انهي تكنيك منهم انا هستخدمه واعمل بريف ديسكريبشن ليه مع ريفرنس. لكن لو انا بوصف تكنيك اللي عامله جديد خالص ما حدش اشتغله قبل كده، فالمفروض ان انا بوصفه ان ديتيلز في الميثود سيكشن. فكل النقط دي المفروض ان هي تضاف في الميثود سيكشن. ريزلتس، ودي اللي هي زي فؤاد المهندس زمان في الفيلم، المكنه طلعت الريزلتس، النتائج والحاجات اللي احنا المفروض نشوفها. ودي ان شورت المفروض ان هي واحنا نكتب النتائج المفروض الاوبجكتيفز اوف ذا ريسيرش شود بي كيبت ان مايند. يعني ايه؟ يعني المفروض ان حضرتك بتجمع داتا ضخمه ساعات للمرضى اللي انت بتجمع منهم الموضوع او الستادي جروب، وانت بتجمع هذه الداتا انت في دماغك ايه الحاجات اللي انت بتدور عليها. لو احنا بنعمل ستادي على لان كانسر وبنشوف الابروتش وبنشوف البين سكور بتاع العيانين دول، الاوبجكتيفز اوف ذا ريسيرش شود بي كيبت ان مايند. احنا قلنا ان احنا لو احنا بنشتغل على ريسيرش على اللان كانسر وبنكلم الناس على ان احنا مثلا بنستخدم نيو تكنيك راتس فيرسز راتس، فاحنا مش هيبقى مهم عندنا ان احنا نحط to be included في الريزلتس مثلا بعض الداتا زي how many patient was having a high education ومين فيهم كان illiterate مثلا. لكن لو احنا البحث بتاعنا بيشتغل مثلا على تيلي ميديسن، لو احنا بنشتغل على تيلي ميديسن فمثلا في هذه الحاله الليفل اوف education بتاع المريض هيفرق عندنا. فالريزلتس that do not relate to the research objective should not be mentioned and statistics should not take over the paper. الريزلتس احنا المفروض ان احنا بنوفر فيها، او الريزلتس المفروض انها بتتقدم للناس عن طريق 3 حاجات، يا اما هي تكست يا تيبل يا فيجرز. المفروض ان احنا بنعمل ميكس من ده في الريزلتس بتاعتنا، والمفروض ان الحاجه اللي ممكن ان احنا نقدر نقدمها از تكست ما بنقدمهاش از تيبل، واللي بنقدمها كتيبل ما بنقدمهاش كفيجر، وهكذا. ازاي بنختار؟ ان شورت احنا بنحاول ان احنا الداتا البسيطه بنحطها على ليست. يعني مثلا عندنا 2/3 of the study group were females، فدي مش محتاجه ان احنا نعمل لها tabulation ونحط هنا 2/3 وهنا 1/3، لكن ومش محتاجين ان احنا نعمل لها باي تشارت ونحطها لان هي باينه. لكن لو احنا عندنا مثلا 5 most common operation done وعندنا 5 نشوف كم البرسنتج بتاعتهم، فلو اتحطوا في باي تشارت او حطوا في تشارت او فيجر هيبان شكلهم اوضح. في حين ان احنا عندنا multiple variables like the demographic data بتاعت العيانين دول و2 groups or 4 groups، ففي الحاله دي لو احنا عملناهم في tabulation هيبقى الوضع بتاعهم والصوره بتاعتهم اوضح. فاحنا بنختار على اساس الداتا. ساعات كتيره بيبقى من الكومن ميستيكس ان احنا بنستعين بحد ستاتستيشن عاوز يعني يكرمنا شويه، فبيدينا كل الداتا مره مكتوبه تكست ومره مكتوبه تيبلز مكتوبه فيجرز، بس لا we have to choose carefully امتى نستخدم الداتا بتاعتنا وازاي نستخدمها. هنتنقل بعد كده للنقطه بتاعت الدسكشن، واحنا قلنا ان هي دي انا شايف ان هي بتبقى اصعب نقطه في الكتابه. الدسكشن most difficult part in the manuscript should be targeted discussion عشان نقدر نوصل تبقى to keep it focus. عشان نتخيل الدسكشن والمشكله اللي بتحصل فيها، فانا دايما بعتبر ان الدسكشن دي زي البوست ماتش اناليسيس ستوديو، زي الاستوديو التحليلي اللي بعد الماتشات. يعني ايه؟ يعني المفروض ان احنا زي ما الكابتن فاروق جعفر كان بيقول نتكلم كفنيين. كابتن مدحت يعني ايه؟ يعني مش هينفع ان انا اجي اقول والله احنا طلعنا نتائج كويسه والمجموعه الثانيه دي طلعت نتائج اقل مننا. ده مش كفايه. ده ما فيش حد بيعمل كده في الاستوديو التحليلي. حضراتكم بتتفرجوا على الاستوديو بيعمل ايه؟ بيقول احنا المره دي لعبنا بالطريقه الفلانيه فكان الاداء بتاعنا كويس، مع اني عندنا اللعيب ده مصاب، وفي حين ان الفريق الثاني عمل كده. يعني اللي هنا اللي هو بيعرض وجهه نظر، هو عنده معلومات وعنده باك جراوندز عن الفرق الثانيه وعن الماتشات اللي فاتت، لكن في نفس الوقت هو ما بيعرضش كل النتائج من الحتت دي كده، وانما بيطعمها او بيضيف عليها وجهه نظره ونظرته لهذا الموضوع والتحليل بتاعه ليها. هو ده الدسكشن بتاعنا. خلينا نحط التصور ده او نبص للدسكشن من هذا المنظور من خلال ال6 component for effective discussion section. عشان نكتب دسكشن احنا محتاجين ان احنا نقول فيها ال6 نقط دول: statement of the principal finding, strengths and weakness of the study, strengths and weakness in relation to the other studies, meaning of the study, possible mechanism and implication for clinician and policymaker, unanswered question and future research, and finally the conclusion. لو ناخد كل واحد فلو قلنا ان statement of the principal finding، دايما الريفيور الاديتور اللي بيقرا البيبر بيفترض ان انت ما عندكش حاجه جديده تقولها في البيبر دي، فلازم حضرتك في اول الدسكشن تفاجئه او تديله صوره واضحه لان انت عندك new وتراك هيز اتنشن عشان تقدر تخليه يكمل معاك البيبر ويقتنع بالريزلتس اللي انت قدمتها له في السكشن اللي فات. فلو خدنا اكزامبل على باد ستارت اوف ديسكشن، فهنلاقي مثلا احنا ديسكشن على بيبر هنا بتتكلم على الفاتس فور treatment for spontaneous pneumothorax. هيبتدي الدسكشن ب spontaneous pneumothorax is a common emergency presentation in the respiratory department. It mainly caused by sudden increase. So this blah 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 is very classic for the introduction. لكن for the discussion this is not the proper beginning. لكن لو احنا حبينا نحط good discussion for this topic هقول ان احنا this study investigate 120 patients with the pneumothorax requiring surgery divided in 2 groups according to type of thoracoscopic surgery they had and the air leak duration post-operative drainage are significant higher in vasculectomy. So يعني انا هنا بوري له انا عملت ايه، العدد اللي انا عملته، ان في نتائج وفي statistically significant data. فانا هنا drag his attention ايه ان هو يكمل معايا في الدسكشن. فلو احنا ابتدينا بهذا الشكل هننقل على النقطه اللي بعدها strengths and weaknesses of the study. And here we need to equally emphasize should be given to both the strengths and weakness. So do not let the reader discover your weakness. وفي بعض الناس بيحطوها as a separate entity سواء في thesis او في المانuscript ان هو يحط limitation of the study ويحط فيها الحاجات اللي هو شايف ان هي كانت اقل شويه من المفروض ان هو يحصل في البيبر بتاعته. ولو خدنا مثال هنا هو فاحنا ممكن نقول ان a bad example لو احنا قلنا to the best of our knowledge there is only one previous study which investigated the result of ligation of a poly by self ligature in comparison to use a stapler in vasculectomy. وبعد كده ده مثلا ده السترينث، بس بعد كده vas ligation should be the standard guideline for treatment of the pneumothorax. يعني عندنا 2 studies بس وعاوز يبقى هو ده الستاندرد جايد لاينز من غير ما يقول اي weaknesses في الستادي و this is wrong. لكن لو احنا حبينا ناخد a good example ممكن نقول على نفس الفريز دي to the best of our knowledge there is only one previous study which investigated the result of ligation by let's suture blah 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 with a less patient cohort than the current study. So I said that it is having we have a merit here, we have a good strength point here that we have more patient cohort in this study. لكن هكمل عشان اجيب حاجه من الويكنسز بتاعتي عشان اكشفها له او اقول له although our study did not include a post-operative follow-up CT scan, we report low recurrence rate on the follow-up chest X-ray. So here we try to emphasize again strengths and weakness of our study. The next point will be the strengths and weakness in relation to the other studies. وهي بقى هنا دي النقطة اللي احنا ندخل فيها others. مين اللي اشتغل قبلنا؟ مين اللي هنحطه هنا؟ هنحط كل الناس اللي حاطين evidence قبلنا. All evidence bearing on the argument with or against should be considered. Discuss the opposing point of view. Avoid ignoring studies with similar results. يعني لازم حتى الحاجات اللي مطلعها نفس النتائج أضيفها هنا في الدسكشن سيكشن. فاحنا لو خدنا a bad example اللي احنا لو قلنا ان in the study of Mo مثلا the mean duration of post-operative stay like 4.6 according to Puri et al. The mean was 4 and the mean hospital stay. Furthermore, the other one was having a hospitalization expense. So an unstructured يعني بقول له هنا دول 4 ودول 4 من غير ما اديله اي رابط للقصه دي in relation to my study. The good part of this discussion should be like this one. Mean hospital stay in our study were 4.4, 4.2 and 3.8 in both groups. This was in line with other study like Mo et al. Was having a 4.6 and Puri was having a 4. Despite the fact, and here ده بقى هنا تدخلي أنا عشان أوري له ان انا بعمل analysis. هو ده الاستوديو التحليلي. Despite the fact that both study include only primary spontaneous pneumothorax while our study include 29% of patients having a secondary spontaneous pneumothorax with no tendency to longer hospital stay age blah blah blah. So here احنا بنحاول ان احنا نحلل هذا المنظومه، مش مجرد ان هو ارقامه احسن واحنا ارقامنا او هو زي ارقامنا واحنا ارقامنا زي ارقام ده وعكس ارقام ده. ليه كانت كده والاكسبلانيشن او البوسيبل ميكانيزم ده مهم. جزء مهم برضو من السترينث اند ويكنس in relation to other study is to critically evaluate other paper methodology finding and conclusions. يعني مش مجرد ان انا اكتفي بالابستراكت او بالريزلت سيكشن بتاعهم بس. Different results should be discussed and possible explanation offered. If you do not know why the results are different say so. قول ان انت مش عارف توصل للنقطه دي. خلينا مثلا هنا نقول ان احنا في نفس المثال السابق اللي احنا بنتكلم عليه، لو احنا قلنا له ان there was no statistic significant difference between vasosplectrum using ligation as stapler as regard age, sex and smoking. اللي قرا الكلام ده ما استفاد، هو فهم كده ان التو جروبس ار ماتشد and the demographic data is the same، لكن ما وصلنا لهوش معلومه واضحه ليها علاقه بالكلام اللي احنا بنقوله. لكن لو احنا هنا عرضنا مثلا نمو تعال operate on 66 consecutive primary spontaneous pneumothorax using the technique of hand sewing blah blah blah، بعد كده هقول له ان مو refer to the technique as a hand ligation، لان هو كان بياخد البوله بيطلعها من البورت بره الشست ويعمل لها ligation، بعد كده يدخل البوله جوه الشست، ففي الحاله دي ما كانش توتال ثوراكوسكوبي. فهنا دي نقطه او معلومه انا مش هقدر اعرفها من الابستراكت سيكشن دي، انا محتاج ان انا اقرا الميثودولوجي بتاعه واشوف التكنيك اللي هو استخدمه واقراه كويس عشان اقدر اعمل له كريتيك. وهنا نقطه ان احنا البيبرز اللي احنا بنستخدمها في الدسكشن we should read it carefully ونعمل لها فريم ورك، وهنتكلم in minutes على ازاي بنعمل هذا الفريم. بعد كده المفروض ان احنا المين اوف ذا ستادي، واحنا الحاجه اللي احنا وصلنا لها البوسيبل ميكانيزم اللي وصلنا لهذا النقطه. implication for the clinician and policy maker do not move beyond the limited evidence provided by the study. ما تحاولش ان انت تقول مثلا pain score كان هايل وانت ما قستش اصلا pain score في this study. emphasize not only what the results mean but also what the results do not mean، وده نقطه مهمه. في الباد discussion هاجي في النقطه بتاعت المينينج او الاكسبلانيشن هقول له the current study shows that this is higher than this or significantly higher، ومش هديله possible explanation ليه ده حصل. لكن في الجود discussion section انا هكلمه على ان دول possible attribute this could be attributed to، واحاول احط possible mechanism سواء دي كانت supported by the evidence from the literature او possible mechanism انا شايف ان انا من خلال الشغل هي دي اللي ممكن تكون السبب. الان answered question، ودي النقط اللي بتبقى for and further research او future research، ودي you should be specific فيها. الباد example for this ان انت تتكلم على البيبر as a whole من غير ما تقول بالظبط ايه النقطه السبيسيفيك اللي انت عاوز تدور عليها. good example ان انت تقول ان انت this new technique that you investigate in this study was given a good early outcome but yet the potential disadvantage of this technique on the long-term outcome is not known. So the future point of research should be the long-term outcome of this technique. The conclusion، وفي conclusion هنا احنا بنقول دايما ان the good paper the body of the good paper is thunder plot in reverse، برق ورعد بالعكس. ف it begins with the thunder الانترودكشن، وعباسط حموده بيغني، هو ده الصوت العالي اللي بيجذب الناس عشان تبص على البيبر يشوف فيها ايه. and end with lightning، هو ده conclusion، هي دي الفكره والثمره بتاعت البحث، ودي بتيجي في الاخر، هو ده البرق او الوميض اللي هيبان في الاخر. فده عشان بس حضراتكم تفتكروا هذه النقطه. avoid unqualified statement and conclusion not completely supported by the data، ان احنا نقول له حاجات احنا ما وصلنا لهاش، زي مثلا ان انا اقول له ان ده كان more effective من غير ما اقول له ده كان في الايرلي ولا الليت ولا في انهي in which terms. لكن الجود ان انا اقول له ان النيو تكنيك ده كان having a comparable results to the standard technique in terms of short-term results and offer less complication. Nevertheless the experience with this method is limited to a short-term outcome، واقول له ان احنا محتاجين further research to confirm these techniques. دول سريعا الانترودكشن methods results وبعض الكلام شويه على discussion. يفضل لنا شويه tips and tricks عن my script writing، ودي نقط يعني انا لقيتها وانا بدور في الشغل، واتمنى ان احنا ممكن نفيد بيها بعض، ولو حد عنده نقط تانية ممكن نضيفها ان شاء الله بعد ما نخلص. اول نقطه هي try to Google or YouTube using the Microsoft Word to write down a thesis or a research. في different videos بتشرح ازاي تعمل a long manuscript وازاي تقسمها لشابترز، وده بتبقى مفيد جدا. try to have a copy on the cloud، سواء iCloud، Google Drive، OneDrive، اي حاجه من دول. المهم ما تبقاش بس على اللابتوب، لو السيستم حصل فيه مشكله او crash down تخسر الشغل المهم اللي انت بتشتغله. try to learn and maybe invest some money in buying a manager program, very important and very effective, the EndNote, and even the one who's free like the Mendeley is very important to guide your work. انت هتشتغل research كتير مش مجرد one or two, so this is a very important point. اول ما تيجي تشتغل في اي مانuscript اورجانيزيشن، ان انت تعمل اوتلاين هتكتب ايه وايه النقط الاساسيه اللي انت عاوزها، وانت بتكتب خلي في دماغك think about the reader، فكر في اللي هيقرا الكلام ان هو عاوز يوصل لمعلومه جديده وعاوز يلاقي الكلام بتاعك مرتب وتاخده واحده واحده من اول الموضوع لاخره. decide what reference you will need to have، زي ما قلنا ان احنا هنعمل كريتيك للريفرنسز دول في الدسكشن، فلازم نجيبهم كلهم وناخد الفول تكست بتاعهم ونقراهم كويس بحيث ان احنا نقدر نعمل عليهم كريتيك مظبوط واستوديو تحليلي زي الكابتن فاروق جعفر. You should have written your comments and attach it to every article you read، even لو انت بتستخدم a PDF format ممكن تعمل كومنت عليها بحيث ان this paper was prospective, this paper was retrospective, this paper having the largest numbers, this paper for long term effect، وبحيث انت تقدر ترجع لهم بسهوله وانت بتجهز الدسكشن سيكشن بتاعك. Now you are start to write. اول ما تستارت to write you have to have a timetable، وده very important. احنا الحاجات دي بتبقى ساعات مفتوحه، لو انت بتشتغل في رساله ماجستير او دكتوراه يستحسن ان انت تحدد مع الادفايزر او المشرف بتاعك ميعاد عشان تسلمه الشابتر. لو انت عارف انت هتسلم المشرف او هتبلغ المجله او هتشوف الناس اللي هيشتغلوا كو اوثر معاك في البحث على لاخر الاسبوع اللي جاي، فانت هتبقى متاكد او هتحاول ان انت تفوكس يور اتنشن ان انت خلال الاسبوع ده تخلص الشغل. دايما لما الناس تعمل حاجه كده يعمل ملف ويقول لك فاينل وبعد كده بص يلاقي فيه ريفيجنز فيبقى فاينل ريفيجن 6 كومنت ومش عارف ايه، فانا دايما بقول تسمي الملف فاينل ذا كيرسيف وورد فاينل. انت هتعمل ان شاء الله ابحاث كتيره، فدايما كل حاجه تعملها باسم التايتل بتاع الحاجه دي وتحط عليه تاريخ، وكل ما تغير النسخه خلي النسخه القديمه واعمل نسخه ثانيه منها جديده سيف از، عشان لو بعد كده ما عجبتكش التعديلات اللي انت عملتها ترجع للنسخه الاصليه ما تبقاش ضيعتها. طيب احنا معظمنا او يعني كتير مننا مش لغته الاولى او الانجليش، فاحنا دايما الوحده البناء اللي احنا بنشتغل بيها في الباراجراف في الدسكشن او في الرايتنج هي الباراجراف. والفرق مش ان احنا الباراجراف حجمه كده او حجمه كبير كده او حجمه صغير، الباراجراف هو عباره عن توبيك سنتنس وليه سبورتنج فاكتس عشان لما ابتدي اكتب. فانا مثلا لو انا بكتب في الانترودكشن وهكتب على اللان كانسر، فانا لان كانسر is the leading cause of death worldwide، this is the topic sentence. بعد كده supporting facts تحتها هحط الانسيدنس of lung cancer في the last 5 years في UK USA وفي العرب countries وهكذا، فدول النقط. فهو ده الباراجراف لو احنا بنتكلم على هذه النقطه. طيب لو انا هبتدي اكتب دلوقتي وتايه مش عارف هبتدي فين، اكتر مثال انا لقيت ان هو مناسب الكتابه فور سبيد رايتنج هو الفور درافت تكنيك. الفور درافت تكنيك ببساطه شديده ان احنا هناخد في الاول درافت رقم 1 او المسوده الاولى، هعمل فيها اوتلاين ستيج، هشوف انا عاوز اكتب ايه. انا عاوز اكتب الدسكشن، عاوز اكتب الانترودكشن، عاوز اكتب الميثودز، عاوز اكتب الدسكشن، النقط الاساسيه، وهقسم النقط. لو انا الدسكشن عاوز اتكلم على النقطه دي والنقطه دي الحاجات الاوليه. بعد كده درافت 2 هو البرين ستورمنج، العصف الذهني، وده ان انا بحاول بقى اجيب كل الافكار اللي ليها علاقه بهذه النقطه واحطها في هذا النقطه او هذه الشابتر. كل الافكار هحطها هنا من غير اي اوردر، جرامر، سبيلينج، بانكتويشن، just put the ideas inside في هذا الشابتر او هذا الكاتيجوري وسيبها دلوقتي. ونرجع بعد كده في درافت 3 شيفرنج اند سورتنج، هو ده بقى مرحله الفرز والتصنيف. ان انا هبتدي ده هنا هيظهر في الفيرست سيدز اوف جرافت جيرمينيت جرو اند فلورش. المفروض ان احنا بقى نجيب بقى كل مجموعه افكار او حاجات ليها علاقه ببعض وكلهم زي بعض لايك ايتش اذر ونحطهم في باراجراف، وبعد كده نبتدي نحط الباراجراف ده الستارتنج سنتنس وسبورتنج فاكتس تيجي تحته، وكده هنبتدي نكون الوحدات الاساسيه للدسكشن سيكشن. درافت 4 ده هو البريننج او الصنفره او الوش النهائي، ان هو بنبتدي بقى نقرا الكلام مره كمان ونبتدي بقى نحط التكنيكال كونتنتس ونحط التشيك الجرامر والسبيلنج والبانكتويشن. لو احنا عملنا كده في الاغلب ده هيخلي عمليه الكتابه سبيدي اكتر من الطبيعي بالنسبه لنا. نلاحظ ان احنا طبعا لازم يبقى عندنا ناخد بالنا من الستايل جود جرامر، وده بيبقى علامه للاديتور وللريفيورز قد ايه انت مهتم بالشغل بتاعك ومطلعه بشكل كويس. نحاول ان احنا نستخدم an easy English، يعني مثلا الناس بتستخدم at this point in time this is instead of now، ده مش صح. المفروض ان احنا نكتب just now. وطبعا عندنا استخدام الانجليش اديتنج سيرفيس في بعض الاحوال بيبقى مفيد لو احنا الانجليش بتاعنا ما هواش كفايه. طبعا زملاء فاضل غطوا النقطه بتاعه البلجريزم، لكن انا زلت يعني النصيحه اللي انا وصلت لها من اساتذتي وانا بحاول ان اعملها the best plagiarism check is to write yourself. ما تعملش copy and paste، لكن تكتب بنفسك زي ما الدكتور مسين كان بيتكلم. نقطه مهمه كمان هي البير ريدنج. البير ريدنج ان هو مش شرط اول حد يقرا المانuscript بتاعك يبقى المنتور، المشرف، الايديتور. ممكن حد من الزملاء الاقران يقرا الكلام وممكن يساعدك في ان هو يشوف منه ان كان هو فهم الكلام لما قراه على بعضه، ولا في مشكله في حته مش واضحه، في حته فيج. ممكن ساعات الواحد لما بيدخل كتير بيبقى فوكسنج على one point، ما بياخدش باله من الحاجات اللي حواليه، فلما حد يقرا تاني هيبقى احسن. beginning the real work and do not be upset لو المانuscript رجعت كلها inked red في اول مره او اول كام مره. دايما الادفايسور او الجورنال اديتور بيحاول ان المانuscript تبقى as good as possible، لان his and your reputation are affected by it. الجورنال اديتور متوقع منك ايه لما تبعت له الارتكل بتاعك؟ هو متوقع ان انت identify a worthwhile problem or question ما كانش previously answered، او ان انت المعلومه اللي انت هتحطها هتبقى at least contribute some facts for better understanding of a topic selected. فهو ده دايما خلي دي في بالك وانت بتجهز المانuscript بتاعتك للمجله. ثانك يو. ده كان يعني ان شورت كده اوفر فيو. انا كنت بكلم دكتور عامر ان موضوع المانuscript رايتنج محتاج وقت طويل، ومحتاجين ان احنا ممكن نعمل سيشن لوحدها فور تايتل اند انترودكشن، وسيشن لوحدها فور ابستراكت رايتنج، وسيشن هاو تو ريبلاي فور ذا ريفيور. لكن ده اوفر فيو، اتمنى ان هو يكون مفيد لكم جميعا. شكرا لحضراتكم على هذه الفرصه ولحسن الاستماع.
طيب دكتور حسين, thank you very much for this presentation, and I have to admit that I have to raise my hat a third time for this beautiful presentation, to the point how you did explain too many subjects. You have referred us to many small important points. Really, you have drawn such a good road for researchers to write their papers. Thank you very much. I have only to contradict you in two very important things. Sorry. The first, that it appears that you are a fan of Zamalek and I am a fan of Ahli. So this is the first thing. The second thing, as we both like soccer, it appears that you prefer to be an attacker. You played as an attacker. I always played as a midfield or a defender. The personality, as Dr. Hassan said, the personality of the writer appears in the discussion section. This is your personality. This is you speaking to your readers. So you have to express your personality as an attacker, as Dr. Hussein advised you. Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for this excellent presentation.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yes, we will discuss, of course, the meeting by the end of this section. Now I'm inviting our last speaker, Dr. Moheb Rashid. Dr. Moheb Rashid is the president of the World Society of Cardiothoracic Trauma, Gothenburg, Sweden, and he will talk to us about finding an appropriate journal and the process of scientific estimation and evaluations prior to publication. Dr. Moheb, you are invited to take the lead, please.
شكرا جزيلا. أنا شاكر جدا على الدعوة الجميلة دي، وإن شاء الله هنمشي بسرعة هنا، وأنا سعيد باللقاء معكم إن شاء الله. أنا قلت نهدي إخواننا اللي توفوا في الزلزال قبل ما نبدأ في تركيا كام ثانية كده من أجمل ما بسمع.
كيف نكلم
we will talk about a very boring subject, basically. It is criticism. It is just judgment. We criticize. It is not so very popular for our colleagues and any researchers. So once there is a paper submitted to any journal, there is usually a letter of submission. And this letter usually includes the title, running title, and quite a lot of informations that are so important and very, very identical in all journals. It is very important that we write the why just to this journal, the rationality for that. And all the authors should be with the registration numbers, if there is a clinical trial or not, acknowledgement, and so on. All the information for the corresponding author should be there. And we try to decrease the bias, mostly in all journals. So we usually need a blinded article file, where there's no names, no places, no nations, exactly as my colleagues previously perfectly presented. So the main manuscript should be there, ethics, approval, and so on. The whole thing should be in this blinded article file. And I'll give you a fantastic example for plagiarism that has been really well done before tonight by my colleagues, Dr. Hamoumi, and touched later on by Dr. Khayat. Plagiarism is we see it the whole time. We reject articles before I send it to reviewers. This is the main, what I call the main task of an editor. When you get a letter, you should check for plagiarism. And we have basically a button just to check this in our menu in the revision process. I give you an example of that. You know, probably all of you know Clarence Crawford, professor in Stockholm, who basically the first to do ligation of the patent ductus arteriosus in 1942 and a correction of the aorta first in the world in 44. But this has been forgotten. Of course, he published all the things in the local Swedish journals. Why Robert de Grasse, he was in Boston and of course, in the Harvard University, a surgeon there, cardiovascular surgeon, and he got the credit for that. He was not the first. He did ligation exactly as Clarence did 3 years later, and the correction, he did it 1 year later in 45. But he still got the credit for that. And it's still written in major cardiothoracic and vascular journals. This is really a plagiarism, but you cannot change anything. It is still plagiarism. So the other point we usually wanted to avoid is the fraud. The fraud just to fabricate anything, to make just an article, a fantastic article for probably you wanted to give the Nobel Prize for it or so, like this one. This is the scandal. We call it the Chernobyl at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, the institute where Nobel Prize for medicine and or physiology is usually given. So this surgeon, thoracic surgeon from Italy, he was there for a short period as visiting professor, the transplantation of a plastic trachea seeded with the stem cell of the patient's own blood. This really, when you read the article, when you see what was done, it was no science, no ethics, nothing at all. It was a real fraud. We call it the catastrophe scandal. So once you get an article, don't be situated by the place where it is Stanford or Boston or Stockholm or whatever. Don't be deceived that this is a famous surgeon. No, take everything really with the standard. Check it for plagiarism and fraud. And it's not an easy task, but it is. Racism, yes, we see in everyday basis. If you don't see it, then you're not looking well. Segregation does exist. Discrimination does exist. Racism needs that you work with different nationalities. You should work with that to see it. If you're not, you'll not see it. So this is a good example. We know that Vivian, she was a Black surgical technician in Chicago, just as a high education in the school. The secondary school. This is the highest education she got, and she was the designer of the first successful subclavian artery to pulmonary artery anastomosis. That was great. That was the acute solution for blue babies in the trilogy fellow, for example. She worked so much for hemorrhagic shock and the first to invent the defibrillator. But Vivian Thomas, she didn't get the credit for all this. This is a theft, as described before. This is a real plagiarism. So once we get an article, we usually look for the abstract. The abstract is the main thing in any contribution. If you read the abstract very well, then the article will go further, at least from the hands of the editor to the reviewers. And please check the keywords. Keywords are so important. So I check them very, very well and carefully. The step that usually is structured, and sometimes it is not structured, particularly for case report. So we usually look for the topicality of any work. Is it up to date or not? If there's similar topics or not? And if there's anything to add to the existed information already in the literature. Afterwards, we send it to 2 or more reviewers to make a decision of the article. We put any contribution as an evidence level. We usually put them in 1 to 5. The first one, of course, this looks like a pyramid. The RCTs, as you all know about that. Level 2 is the prospective cohort studies. 3 is retrospective, that is the majority of the studies. And then came case reports, number 4, and lastly, communications, commentaries, editorials, and so on. We usually give this to the peer review. Peer review process is really a very distinct review process. And this is the responsibility of the journal, responsibility of the editor-in-chief. It's so important because it is a cornerstone of scientific evaluation. It will be the basis to make the, you make guidelines, you make treatment directions, and so on and so on. It is so important and strict. It is usually important for optimizing scientific contents, reproducibility, and even to remove any less qualified studies or poor quality studies. The characters of a peer reviewer, we usually choose them basically. They should be weaponed with the necessary expertise, well-known in the field. That's so important. And they have the time to do this job. You can give it to a well-known person, but you have no time to do it. And then the time go over, then you stop the whole process. It's not good either. And it must be constructive. You cannot give the work to one that is arrogant, have no time, and so on. This cannot be a reviewer either. So it should be no conflict of interest. It is so important as well. The advantages of being selected the reviewer is so good as well, because it is you recognize such a person as an expert in the field. They contribute very good to the literature quality and even to improve the guidelines. And this is good for the person, him or herself as well. And it is a volunteerism because you not pay for any reviewer, you not pay. We personally as a editor-in-chief, we are working in free time. No one is paid in pounds. It is a volunteerism. Volunteerism for the science, volunteerism for improving the guidelines, improving techniques of surgery, and so on. So it is a time commitment, and it is a time of good service. And it is a huge ethical responsibility. Okay, now I wanted to go as fast as possible to the parts of any contribution as introduction, patient's methods, etc. Really, it was so covered so well before, so I will not go into details on anything. This is the first The first talk I ever given was so much details with words. I usually have just pictures. So the introduction, it should be short. Why we dislike any introduction that is here. Once I read any contribution with huge introduction, it is not so good. I don't need it. For example, we gave you much examples of that and fast. For example, if you read an article concerning the surgical fixation of rib fractures. So it is not needed to say that surgical fixation is better than non-surgical. It's already known. Go to the point. Go to the point in your introduction. The pain, yeah, we know that there's pain. I don't need so many articles and so many papers you write on and referring to in the introduction concerning that. Please make it short, because the majority, over 90% of the contributions, whatever from the United States, from Middle East, from any continent, usually huge. And this is not so good point. So be short up there, and you should have a precious thing to talk about. That is very important. It is the originality. And I give you an example of what we previously heard and the trauma day, for example, just to remember. What is the originality here? Once we write introduction, I write introduction for what was done. The point here is what was done right or not. This is a point. And this point, unfortunately, is neglected by so many. For example, if you look here, this was a lecture before in the Emergency Department for Academy, if you remember the last time of this group. So Dr. Wise, I see here at the end of the as a reference for Emergency for Academy. This is a surgical instrument. I can't see any single instrument here is valid for Emergency for Academy. From right to left, if you look from the right side, this is a scissor. The scissor is not for surgery. The scissor is for cutting clothes. This you can buy it from IKEA in Sweden or in any glossary. The second one is just a knife, a plastic knife. It is used for a nevus extubation. The third is a straight needle holder. We don't see anything resuscitative for academy in the first few minutes. We wanted to stop bleeding. We wanted to make the patient alive. And then the fourth instrument here is the Golgi saw. For what? It's not needed there. Yes, because it seems for me, it is British, and they usually cut the stone transversely to do what is called a clamshell. That is completely traumatic, that's completely dangerous, and non-scientific at all. And they usually are making more trauma to the patient, probably kill the patient more than the original trauma. So you can't see here anything is right. If you wanted to write an article and refute this, I'm making reference to such, it is already cut your own paper. So don't do that. The next example, like this, as we heard it before, resuscitative for academy. This is not resuscitative for academy. You have a dying patient. There's no time to measure anything. You go under the nipple of the left breast and the cut. No time to measure anything. So this cannot be used at all in this situation. The same thing here. This is in a cadaver and showing resuscitative for academy, how to put the Phoeniciated spreader. Phoeniciated spreader is localized very wrong because the transverse blade there will interfere with a major maneuver that I wanted to do. That is the aortic cross clamping. I can't go to the aorta. The aorta is there. Exactly. Will interfere with this. And any movement of the Phoeniciated will transect the aorta together with the vascular clamp and so on. This is absolutely big fault in doing resuscitative thoracotomy. And here, this is a real final procedure. I never allow any person to do that in my institution. This is, if you wanted to resuscitate a patient, never do that, because here's cutting the patient transversely for what? I wanted to go to the heart. I wanted to go to the aorta, these two organs, to stop the bleeding. Why and go to the other side? And once it's transecting the sternum, it takes time. Then I will create 4 inches of bleeding, two memories on each side. So this is not scientific at all. So this is what I'm doing, and this is go fast. I need only 2 to 3 minutes, then I have control. Maximum 3 minutes before the brain is dying. So if you look for the Lockett, who published an article in 2000 in British Medical Journal, he had one survival of 1,500%. So it is a decimal survival. We have the opposite. I have in my hands over 80%. And it has something to do with the technique itself, as you previously seen from the British literature. This is also British from Nottingham, I think. They have 8 patients. Only 1 survived. Compared with us, we have 9, all survived except 1. For example, there are others have 100% mortality, even from Scandinavia, comparing their results with others. So this technique, for example, is thorough. So if you wanted to write introduction, write it on correct information. It does not mean that if any article is published, then it means correct. No, it is not. Look at this. I can say this is plagiarism as well. William Harvey, a Scotch that in the 1700s, thought that he got the credit for the invention of circulation. But the ancient Egyptians preceded him by 4,000 years. 4,000 years. And he knew that. So he's a real thief. And this is well known because if you see the information about the ancient Egyptians and making and talking about the circulation, it is already present in the walls, not only in the papers, in the walls as well. And I have an article here from Texas Heart Journal by the Wasban. He was a chief cardiologist at that time. He gave me the article himself. I was there just to see the book. It was so many years ago, and my earliest years and training. And it's still written. These things are still written. You know, circulation research is a part of the American Heart Association journals. It is a prestigious journal as well for the cardiovascular research in general. So William Harvey and the discovery of the circulation is still written about it. This is a plagiarism. This is not true. Another example, Heberden, also Scotch, also called William. All of them called William at that time. William Heberden and William Harvey. Heberden got the credit for the first man to describe the angina pectoris. No, he's not. Also, ancient Egyptians, for over 4,000 years ago, they described it in details, more than Heberden wrote. And they usually written that the left ring finger was called the heart finger. The ancient Egyptians were the first to say that. Heberden didn't know that. So this is a plagiarism as well, but it's accepted plagiarism. It's written in Minnesota. It's just a few years ago. Anyhow, the introduction, you just got example of how it is. So if we look for the introduction, it should be on smart and proportional to the article. Don't make it so big, and it should be on solid, correct information and moderately referenced. We do not so much references up there. And the classic reference. And please check the references very well. Mostly the references are not correct. The introduction should be attractive. If I wanted to make a summary of the introduction, it should be attractive. Attractive, short discussion of the whole thing. What I wanted to do, that there's a problem and you have a solving to this problem. Put it please in the introduction. This is the point. The point of introduction, that you stimulate me to read this paper. This is the point. And it should be clear and simple. Don't use the worst, biggest words. This is not good. Use as simple as possible words. The words should be at the simplest as you could. Then the assessment. How can we assess that? Yeah, we look at the scientific merit, of course, the importance of this study, and if there's a justification of it or not. And if this study falls a significant current gap in the literature or not. This is giving the importance of the study. Now we go to another section. It's called the patients and the methods. The point here, we usually don't like it. Any editor don't like this point, that the patients and the methods is very short. Please make it detailed. This is the point. Make it very, very detailed. It tells us that this is a very good planning. This is a good design study, and describe everything on it. So this section should be in details. We usually look for the clear hypothesis, if there is a similar closer data already exists or not, and usually in the introduction as well, there's some interrogations here. Is this totally unique or not? Or if there's a little novel information you can add to the existing literature. There's some guidelines for the study design, depending on which type of the study. I think this you can find it in any journal. Back to the study population, we heard so much about it, so we just jump over. And how can we assess it? We look for the validity of it, the appropriate to the objectives or not, if it goes together, the accuracy of the statistics, and then the conclusions, to look at it as a whole. Even in every section, you look at as a whole, passing to the previous, passing to the afterwards, and so on. Results. We should look for if it is valid or not, appropriately calculated or not, interpreted well or not. Is the reader could understand it or not? Tables, figures, it shouldn't be. It mostly when we get certain articles, we see that everything is repeated. If you put the information simply, then I don't need a table. I don't need a figure, but sometimes it's repeated. This is nonsense, and it takes just a place in the journal. So try to avoid this. One-sided in the article, either with the tables or the figures, and don't forget the legends to the figures to be in details and to support the conclusion as well. How to assess the results? We should be critical in evaluating it. We should see that the results are clear variables that were used or not, and we look into the outcome. And as I said before, it should be figurized and table figures. And if you wanted to put a reference there, it's not. You can do that. You can do that. But references must be correct at the end. In the discussion section, exactly as we heard lastly from Dr. Al-Khayyat, that its strengths and weakness so important. The unexpected results, and there's certain words we never like to hear them in the manuscript. Looks like our results very good. We expected something very, the word very, avoid it. Every exaggerated word, avoid it. It's not good at all. The limitations are so important, as we previously heard, and any appropriate conclusion should be done even in the discussion simply. So, once you get all these things out together, then we assess the article. The article go in a flow chart, like in any journal. So we get it from the reviewers, and from the reviewers probably accept or reject, or in the majority, usually there is revision. The revision either major or minor, and then resubmit the article, and then we get it again, and then either probably as an editor-in-chief, I can say, okay, the article is accepted, or I find that the article as a whole is still not to the to what me and the reviewers wanted at the end. Then at the time, then we do even a re-revision. So revision is so important a process and accepting articles or rejecting articles. And a rejection should be with a constructing criticism, just to help the authors to use them for another journal as well. The acceptance rate is extremely different from journal to another. The famous ones, of course, they have acceptance rate very low, like New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, JAMA, and so on. Ours, Journal of Cardiothoracic Trauma, is a very good 56 in 1900. In 2019, for example, it is like the major cardiothoracic surgical journals. Thank you for this. And I wanted to go to the next one talk. It goes faster. It takes just 5 minutes. I wanted to get this. Choosing a journal. We usually look for if this is a reputed journal or not in cardiothoracic surgery. I recommend, if you wanted to I think all of us know what they are: the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular and Thoracic Surgery, and so on, the Journal of Cardiac Surgery. They are well-established journals. We usually look for the editorial board, particularly for the new ones. If you have a strong editorial board, then you are in a right place. Who is the publisher is so important. Is the publisher is well-known or a new publisher? They have no rules, etc. It is so important that you have the best publisher. And for our journal, we have the world's largest publisher, which is Wolters Kluwer. And the modern platform is so important as well. So we usually hear about the impact factor that has been slightly covered before. I will not go so much in it, but just a quiet hint on it. So how often an article is cited? And it usually goes for something called Web of Science. I call it the mafia of impact factor. Many excellent journals are not in the Web of Science. For example, ours. We consider it, yes, it is a personal bias. That's excellent journal. Not only me, but all the people who published in it as well. So impact factor is not associated with the quality of peer review process or the evaluation and assessment and acceptance or rejection. It is not at all. So the quality of articles has nothing to do with the impact factor in these journals. This is an important point. How to be measured? Yes. There's something called the Clarivate Analytics. It is some people there in England, 1916, did this. It looks like a leader in evaluating the quality of things, including scientific journals and scientific articles, scientific things, patents, and so they did in London. So they usually look for the average sum of citations received in a given year to a journal's previous 2 years of publication, and then divide by the sum of suitable publications on the previous 2 years. This is the impact factor. There's quite a lot. It's an ocean of journals out there. It is an ocean. But we know that cardiothoracic surgeons, we are intended to certain journals. So there are 25,000 journals, more than 25,000 journals over there. They publish over 2 million peer-reviewed articles annually. So it is huge. So I remember, for example, the previous editor-in-chief and Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery, that's considered number 1 or 2 in cardiothoracic surgery. This was many years ago. I worked with him shortly before coming to Sweden. So this fantastic man, he was telling us, when you give a literature, you should have the best in everything. Best clothes. I'm sorry, now I'm Swedish. You should have the best things in everything. Best, but when you live in the cheapest hotel. I remember these words from him. Anyhow, he was striving to be the best in everything. I never forget it. Our journal, for example, is the Journal of Cardiothoracic Trauma. It is considered for only the trauma and the chest, whether any type of trauma, even trauma that we personally deal with, the iatrogenic trauma. It is an innovative journal because there's only one in this subject, and it's an open access. Open access is free of charge for the readers, but for the authors, give it some money just to give everything and alive the journal for the publisher. And it is simple to get articles, usually in digital form. We have double-blinded peer review process. Double-blind peer review process. It's not many journals have that. It's interactive as well. This journal is interactive because you can go to any article. You can write what you want, like to the concerning. You can give your comment on this particular article, and it goes directly through me as an editor-in-chief to the author, and you could communicate together concerning the results, etc., etc. So it is basically a very modern journal. So this is what we have from the journal website. So we really found that I counted it at the end of November up to 90% of citations of the original review articles from all volumes. So that is so proud of. So this is fantastic. Many people say, why I put money in this? Yes, you put money because you let doctors living in low-income countries like the whole Middle East. Countries are affected by trauma. And these are the countries that have major trauma, like South America, the whole Middle East, India, Bangladesh, all these areas in the world. It is a low-income countries. They need free articles. They just search for something, they find it. Open access is so important. Our journal at that time, and it is the cheapest journal in the market because it costs, for example, $200 for original for case report. It is 10 times in other journals. Here, for example, article processing charge. This on the right side from the Annals of Cardiothoracic Surgery that many well-known surgeons usually publishing in it as well. $400 compared with 10 times or other journals. So it is cheap, it is valuable, and one of the very, very well-reviewed articles with a very good editorial board that really well known all over the world with their job on trauma and cardiothoracic surgery. This is authorship criteria. It has been already said, and they're just comparing here the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, that is one of the top in thoracic surgery, and ours, that we have done so much just in cardiothoracic trauma compared with such. Of course, we are concentrated on that, but we have done really a significant job in this regard. For example, if we look for once we started in 1916, each volume, you can read the whole volume in 20 minutes, the whole volume. You'll find in each volume something new, never recited in any other journal, and short, concise, and to the point. For example, on the first one, a new mechanism in cardiothoracic trauma. The second one, 17 new technique for cardiac tamponade, etc., etc., etc. So every year we have something new, a unique thing that you attract your attention in a very, very short volume. You read it while you are taking a cup of coffee. Here, for example, we have a whole volume just for the surgical stabilization of your fractures that is attaining a good interest in the whole Middle East right now, particularly in the last literature day, scientific day, it was on trauma. And I heard that they are interested in that. Look at this volume. You will get so much information from all over the world. And you will get these informations in a very short time of period. And must update it, for example, for how to go to the tamponade, for example, from the Professor Maddox that we all know who is he. We have published from prestigious universities all over the world, from Oxford, Stanford, Medtronic, etc., etc. So we really thankful for the job we are doing, and without you, we cannot continue because you are the future of this journal and others for this job and others, and we are waiting for your contributions as authors, as reviewers, and as lecturers and everything to help our patients, particularly in earthquakes, affected areas and war areas and so on. So you guys are needed everywhere. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, sir, for this excellent presentation. I'm really stunned because it is one of the very few times that I cannot express my gratitude and my thanks to you for the information you gave us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was an honor listening to you. Okay, we can give, for example, give each presenter 2 questions, 1 or 2 questions. So I will begin by the first presenter. Anybody who has questions to our first presenter, Dr. Masin Hamoumi. So if anybody has a question to Dr. Masin, he's invited to pose this question. So I have a question already. So I have a question myself, sir. You have signaled a very important point, which is about the choice of the data have to be well chosen at first, and the design also. It is well known, sir, we have to tell our young colleagues that a well-designed study with good data can always be reanalyzed. We can miss something in the analysis, but as we have a good design and good data and informative data, we can reanalyze them. But the reverse is not true. So you can just tell us more about this notion.
Yes, sir. I explained in the presentation about the pilot testing. The pilot testing that we can take a few number of participants and make the statistic to get sure that the results can be adapted. So this pilot testing, it is possible to make revision by coming back to the data and to have accuracy about the data. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did answer it. So I have another question. Are you interested in writing something about the pilot studies? Is this an interesting subject for you, sir?
Yes, of course. Why not?
It's interesting. Okay.
I have just to say something, Ustad min fadlik. The problem of statistics is the training of young doctors. So we should include this in our training skills and our universities to make it easier for the younger people, because the difference between us and the developed countries is this. It's principally.
Yes.
Thank you.
I totally agree. Anybody else want to pose a question to Professor Masin Hamoumi? Anybody else? Any one of the participants? Okay, so your lecture was quite informative. Now I move to our second presenter, Dr. Ahmed Habib. Anyone have a question to address to Dr. Ahmed Habib? The problem of young participants is that they are sometimes too shy to pose a question. I don't know why. I always feel that they are too shy. While the old one like us are not shy. In the discussion, I didn't see it, so let's see.
What is the number?
Yes.
This is the question. What is the number of patients who permits using statistics? In my knowledge, 30. When we have less than 30 to use tests is logic.
Yes.
I think he's asking about the population, the minimum population, or the number of patients that will allow to reach a statistically significant outcome. And this varies depending on what you're looking at, the outcomes that you want to prove. And in a lot of studies, you will not achieve the number of a lot of observational studies, which are single-centered studies, you will not reach a statistically significant population to reach outcomes that you can generalize on the general population. You usually need multi-centered studies to reach those conclusions. And hence, the number of patients in observational studies, and I presume that most of the audience in today's talk are going to be simply using their data from their center, or maximum another center with a colleague to publish an outcome, and they can only suggest an advice in their conclusion. They can't place a conclusion that is to be used in guidelines, which would need a lot more centers and randomized control trials, or massive multi-analysis, which we have not spoken on today. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I have a question to you, Dr. Ahmed. It's also about the sample size. We all know that the absence of evidence is not an evidence of absence. We know that at the beginning we compare groups to show the readers that groups are comparable before the study. So any difference that is observed after the study can be attributed to the effective treatment. But the problem that when we compare groups before the study and we don't find evidence that the groups are significant different from one another, maybe this is sometimes a wrong conclusion, because if there is no evidence in our study, maybe if we increase sample size, we will find that there is a difference between the compared groups before the study and hence any conclusion that they are different because of the effective treatment after the study will be wrong. So how can we solve this problem? How can we go out of this mess?
Well, we are limited in with how much data we have, and statistics at the end of the day is a tool that may or may not succeed in reaching proper outcomes and conclusions that may be right, may be wrong. When your data enlarges and becomes much more larger and your sample size is bigger, your outcomes are more reliable. Sometimes, rarely, very rarely, you see studies using something called neural networks. And to use neural networks, you need a massive amount of data, which is usually not available for us in medicine, in order to conclude or forecast outcomes that can be generalized on the population. And we all understand that. And that's why you have to depict your data. You have to you make suggestions in your conclusions. You cannot enforce anyone to use them. They're not guidelines. Even the studies, and sometimes I was reading when I was doing cardiac surgery, I was looking at the guidelines for operating and performing a CABG on a patient that had a VF arrest. And the guideline, the American Heart Association guidelines suggesting that you can operate on patients that had a VF out of hospital arrest were reliant on 3 studies, the largest of which was a single-centered study that looked at their outcomes over 20 years, and the population was less than 30 patients, and that's in the AHA guidelines. So we are limited, we are restricted, we are working on human bodies. You can't trial and error things on human bodies. You have to use your observational studies. You have to use meta-analysis to try to overcome it. And you have to use randomized controlled trials, teaming up with other colleagues. I mean, this talk today is an example how we can team up together and produce a lot more valid outcomes in a study by teaming up with larger centers and more centers to get a bigger sample size. But don't expect that the Arab countries are lagging behind. No, we're not lagging behind. If you look at the guidelines or look at the references, a lot of them are not reliant on large samples, because this is life. We live in a realistic world.
Yes, very clear, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you very much. I missed the question that was addressed to Dr. Moheb. Why we can organize ethics committee. In our context, for example, the ethics committee is considered at the Faculty of Medicine. We can organize the ethics committee at the Scientific Association. This is his question. So, Dr. Moheb, can you answer him, please?
Would you please clarify the question again?
Rephrase the question, Dr. Amir.
دكتور فؤاد عطواني هو يا فندم صاحب السؤال.
Can he rephrase the question, Dr. Fuad? Dr. Fuad? Yes.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
دكتور إبراهيم، الله يحفظك يا أخي، وأشكرك جدا لأنك رتبت الأمور بطريقة جد احترافية كما نقول.
That's true.
أنا أود صراحة أستفيد من خبرة له جورنال of cardiothoracic trauma، وأنا عاوز عاوز أستفيد من تجربته. أنا سؤالي واضح فيما يخص الإيثكس كوميتي. الإيثكس كوميتي مثلا عندنا في المغرب، الإيثكس كوميتي يخص ما يهتم بالإيثكس كوميتي خصوصا كليات الطب والصيدلة، هم من يفعلون الإيثكس كوميتي. سؤالي أولا، ما هي شروط الإيثكس كوميتي؟ يعني هل ضروري يكون أستاذ عنده خبرة؟ هل ضروري يكون عنده دبلومات في statistics إلى آخره؟ وهل يمكن تفعيل الإيثكس كوميتي مثلا في الجمعيات العلمية، مثلا جمعية جراحة العظام، جمعية جراحة الصدر إلى آخره؟ ما هي
الرابطة؟ مثلا الرابطة دكتور فؤاد؟
مثلا نعمل على كذا إن شاء الله بحول الله. إذا أنا بغيت نستفد من التجربة ديال الدكتور مهيب من هذه الناحية، الإيثكس كوميتي، وبركز عليها جيدا. هذا هو سؤالي، وأعتقد أن سؤالي واضح بالنسبة للدكتور مهيب.
صح، شكرا جزيلا أخي العزيز دكتور فؤاد. ده فعلا هي دي نقطة ضعف كبيرة في الدنيا كلها تقريبا، يعني وإحنا يعني محتاجينها. يعني مثلا لما بنبص على العالم عالميا كده، يعني بنلاقي أن في، لو هنجيب ethics للستادي، في دائما جمعية معينة ليها في الجامعة أو الانستيتيوشن، أحيانا في المستشفى لو مستشفى ضخم كبير، دي في أصلا ethical committee لأي study معروفة، بيبقوا مجموعة كده بياخدوا ويدرسوا الحاجة دي، يشوفها طبقا لماشية طبقا للجايد لاينز اللي عندهم في الethical committee أو لا. لكن للجمعيات ما فيش كإثيكال كوميتي، لكن هي responsibility لكل واحد بيشوف حاجة. مثلا لو أنا هبعت لحضرتك مثلا article وحضرتك تشوف في حاجة ethically مش correct, it's your responsibility that you give me back feedback about that. It is everyone carries a responsibility for checking the ethical issues. So ethics is extremely important. I do agree with all of you, and you touched it. All of you touched it so well. So and you see the plagiarism, theft, steal is very common. It's so common. So I think this is needed. This is needed to be practiced the whole time from us as single surgeons, from us as authors, reviewers, editors, whatever. So all of us should bear the responsibility for that everything is ethically correct. Absolutely. Shukran jazilan. Shukran.
Now we will move to our final presenter, Dr. Hussein Khayat. If anybody has a question to pose to Dr. Hussein Khayat, he is invited to do so. أي حد عنده سؤال لدكتور الخياط يتفضل بخصوص البرزنتيشن بتاعته.
نعم.
تفضل.
أنا عاوز أسأل أخي الدكتور مصطفى، يعني after doing all the conditions to have a good manuscript, did he feel that there is a resistance in acceptance of manuscripts coming from Africa and the Middle East? Because we in North Africa, we feel this with the European journals, with the high impact factor journals. It is difficult to get access to publish there, even with the big value manuscripts. Do you feel this?
I really touched this point, Dr. Massin. If you remember, I touched this point in my talk: racism, segregation, discrimination, etc., etc. It does exist. Yes, I really experienced it personally. I experienced it. I saw it in many communications during the years. I have been a reviewer for many, from the Annals to the Cardiac, so many journals during 3 decades of time. So I knew that it does exist, unfortunately. That is why we try to have a blinded file for any communications, that the reviewers will not know that. Will not know the location, will not know the names of authors, etc., etc. Just to defeat this bias. This bias does exist. I saw many reviewers that communicate with me in my institution, for example, telling me, what's that? This is from, Africa, for example. Excellent article. But once I read the revision, it is somewhat negative. This does exist. And that is a problem. We are facing this point. That is why double-blinded review is so important. It is so important that double-blinded review is the solution for that. And the editor-in-chief, because the editor-in-chief, the only person will know where the article came from, what they did, and so on. So this is the point. And you see how the people steal from each other and they still repeat it. So it is a major problem, and it does exist. So racism, we're feeling it the whole time. Segregation, particularly, we are living in countries with different names. You are the only name that looks like Arabic name or whatever it is. So it is a huge problem, particularly if you are living in the West, and even between different countries as well. The same thing. It is a big problem.
Yes. Dr. Hussein Khayat, do you have something to say about this? Because I know that you have many international publications. So what is your opinion about the same subject? Dr. Hussein?
Well, I try to overcome this problem by have some international collaboration and some joint research. Sometimes يعني ساعات بتبقى المشكلة مش ان احنا الريسيرش جاي من الميدل ايست او من نورث افريكا قد ما البارامترز او المعايير اللي اشتغلنا بيها يمكن كانت مختلفه. واعتقد ان انا في شانغهاي بالمونري هوسبيتال لما كنا بنحضر الكورس بتاع اليوني بورتال فاتس مع دييجو لاحظنا ان مجموعه كتير من التشاينيز سيرجنز عندهم a huge amount of data and new techniques, but they were not able to publish in an international journal at that time in 2016. Why? Because they don't have the ethical committee, they don't have the clinical trial registry number. But once they learn about these points and they try to overcome this, and they don't have a good English, so they hire an excellent English editing service. By these points, they can overcome this problem, and we see now a huge number of research in Q1 ranked journals by the Chinese surgeons. So, يعني فأنا شايف إن إحنا في جزء علينا إن إحنا البارامترز بتاعتنا محتاج إن إحنا نرفعها. في جزء راشيزم زي ما دكتور محب قال، وفي بعض الناس عندها هذا الاتجاه، لكن أعتقد إن هم يعني برضو يعني السيستم نفسه بيحاول إن هو يحتوي هذه النقط. وفي جزء ان احنا نحاول ان احنا نعمل انترناشونال جوينت فينتشر او كولابوريشن، وده بيحسن من السي في بتاعنا ومن الببليكيشنز بتاعتنا، وبالاحتكاك برضو الواحد بيتعلم من الناس حاجات جديده. فدي فكرتي عن الموضوع.
دكتور احمد حبيب, do you have something to say about this point, or do you agree with the other presenters?
I think I mean racism is not. I mean, when you come, if I'm from Egypt and I'm publishing from Egypt some data, and I'm expecting some racism in certain journals, I'm not going to be able to change that, and all I can do is try my best. And if I fail or I get a certain review that I feel is unfair, just take it and publish in another journal. There's so many journals out there, and that journal that refused your piece of work that you did that was good is the one that lost. هم الخسرانين. تمام. The market is huge. I wouldn't worry about it. يعني, I wouldn't worry about it at all. And when I start publishing, I usually send it to a very good journal. I know it's going to turn down a small piece of work that I've done, but they're going to give me some review that I will definitely learn from. Where معلش يعني البهدلة والمرمطة بتعلم, and you get tougher and better.
I totally agree with you. And I want to stress on this point. It's a very intelligent point that the young researchers have to know. We have to benefit from the reviewer's opinion. We have to benefit more from what we consider negative opinion more than a positive opinion. So I totally agree with you, and I encourage our young researchers, whenever you receive a negative feedback from a good journal, this is something that you should be happy with. Because if you really read it, those journals usually they give you positive points, and they will eventually help you in improving your manuscript. I want just to add something here. I don't like, I'm speaking about myself, not about anybody. I don't like to play the role of victim. I don't like to put myself in the position of the victim, because I know, or maybe some of you know, that we are not totally correct. Why we are not totally correct? We are not different from other people. We know that people can be correct, whether they are Egyptian or Chinese or American. There are good people, there are bad people everywhere. But there is a main difference. In those countries, people are judged fairly, more or less, more than in our country. And this is a problem. They know that sometimes when we do not follow correct guidelines, we can get away with it. They know this. They know our society well. Always remember that the كتب الاستشراق اللي هي الكتب اللي شرحت المجتمع بتاعنا في بداية النهضة العلمية، كتبها الأجانب اللي هم عاشوا وشافوا واستعملوا الوسائل العلمية عشان يفهموا مجتمعاتنا. هم فاهمين المجتمعات بتاعتنا، فاهمين إن إحنا هناك لما عندنا بليجرز وعندهم بليجرز، بس هناك أما حد بيعمل بليجرز بيقطعوا رقبته، هنا أما حد بيعمل بليجرز بنقول معلش. This is the point. We have to يعني to blame ourselves first. We have to apply the correct rules correctly in our society. And whenever they will feel this, I think that we will have a more important place in the international literature. This is my personal point of view. We have to, إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. And I think we can start by ourselves. So anybody else want to add to this point or to discuss other point?
مساء الخير.
مساء النور يا فندم.
كاتب من سوريا.
أهلا بيك يا فندم، تفضل.
الله يخليك، شكرا كثير على هاللقاء. نحن بسوريا طبعا بسبب الأزمة الكبيرة اللي صارت لنا بعد السنوات واللي زادتها هلا الأزمة الآخرانية، شكرا لمشاعر الدكتور محب، وأنا متأكد إنه مشاعر الكل مو بس الدكتور محب معنا، نقول الله يفرج علينا أحسن شيء.
أكيد.
في الموضوع اللي أنا شايفه إنه الموضوع مثل كرة القدم، يعني النشر بالوطن العربي مثل كرة القدم بالوطن العربي، في مفاتيح لعبة، في قواعد. نحن للأسف منشوف حالنا إنه يعني بعد سنوات عديدة لحتى وصلت المغرب للمستوى الراقي اللي نحن بدنا إياه. المشكلة إنه لأنه هن فهموا مفاتيح اللعبة. لما نحن نفهم مفاتيح اللعبة تبع النشر نقدر ننشر. ما بيصير مثل ما قلت إنه نحن دائما نحط كل شيء نظرية المؤامرة والناس بتكرهنا ولأنه نحن عرب ولأنه لا، نحن في عنا نقص لازم نواجهه، لازم نتعلم من بعض، لازم نستشير. يعني واحد بده ينشر بده يستشير اللي نشر قبل منه مشان يتعلم منه شو المفاتيح. يعني لما بستشير واحد من الدكتور خياط أكيد بيساعدني كتير لأنه هو كسب كتير. أما أنا إذا بدي أرجع عيد اختراع الدولاب مثل ما بيقولوا، بدي أوصل لمرحلة إنه أنا أقول لا هن هدول الجماعة لأنه حاقدين علي. لا، الموضوع مو حق. أكيد في يعني في عنا عنصرية، في ريزيزم موجودة، بس هي كميتها مثل ما قلتوا إنه أقل بكتير.
صحيح. لا تمام، إحنا متفقين مع حضرتك جدا.
لا متفق، سمع لك. هم في حتى عنصرية ما بينهم وبين بعضهم، يعني ده شيء إنساني. يعني أنا دايما بقول مصر فيها عنصرية. أما بنشوف حد أسمر الوجه شوية بنقول يعني هو أسمر، يعني مش معقول إحنا بنعمل كده في مصر. طب وهم بيبصوا لنا إزاي؟ يعني قصدي ده شيء إنساني، لكن إن إحنا نجلد نفسنا لا، إحنا لازم نبقى أحسن. طيب حد تاني غير الدكتور محب يحب يضيف حاجة يا ريت نسمع.
إحنا محتاجين تقنية الفار في الإيتيك كوميتي.
تقنية الفار. طيب في أي مواضيع أخرى يحب سيادتكم تتكلموا فيها أو يعني؟
إذا سمحت دكتور حسونة.
تفضل يا فندم.
أنا بدي أشكر جدا الدكتور حسين الخياط لأن المحاضرة كانت صراحة جد رائعة عن طريقة تقديم المنشور لأي جورنال كيف ما كان نوعه.
فعلا
طريقة كانت جد احترافية المحاضرة للدكتور الحسين. بغيت نزيد إضافة، ليس لي سؤال، فقط إضافة فيما يخص البيبر. يعني أهم حاجة من غير أن الميثودولوجي لازم تكون مضبوطة، الريزلتس يعني ديسكريبتيف داتا وأفتر الاناليتيك داتا وأفتر ديسكوشن كما شرح الدكتور حسين بطريقة الممثل فؤاد. أعتقد أنه الأبستراكت مرحلة جد مهمة، لأن الأبستراكت في البيبر يعتبر كباب المنزل. يعني الابستراكت لازم يكون مضبوط جدا، لأنه في بعض الحالات ما عندناش البيبر أو نونشي يعني كامله ونضطر نقرأ فقط الابستراكت. يعني أنا مثلا لو أني أقدم منشور لجورنال معين لازم أن الابستراكت يكون اكسلنت، يعني هو الباب وباب البيبر. وآخر حاجة نفكر فيها لما أكون أكتب بيبر هي العنوان، لأن العنوان جد مهم. حاجتين في المانuscript جد مهمين ولازم نركز عليها جيدا، لأن العنوان يثير انتباه القارئ. يعني لازم أركز في العنوان، والأبستراكت لازم يكون excellent أكثر من البيبر. يعني أنا فقط اضافه لما قاله الدكتور حسين، واشكره على البرزنتيشن ديالو.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور فؤاد،
شكرا.
واضافه جميله فعلا. شكرا جزيلا لحضرتك.
ركز على دعوتي، وانا هبقى دايما حريص بقى ان انا احضر مع سيادتكم كبارتيسيبنت بقى، ان انا اقدم حاجه او استمع او بتاع، يعني هكون حريص احضر باي صوره من الصور. اسيبك تختم المقابله. اتفضل سيادتك.
بارك الله في حضرتك يا فندم. مفيش كلمات شكر والله تجازي حضراتكم المجهود المبذول في تبسيط الامور. صراحه انا واحد من الناس حاجه زي كده بالنسبه لي كانت خلاص، ما انا مش هعرف اتحرك في حياتي العلميه، شايفها حاجه جبل. دلوقتي كل الامور صارت اسهل بنسبه 90%، اموري صارت اورجنايزد. شكرا لحضراتكم جزيلا على التبسيط ده، وان شاء الله ربنا ينفع بحضراتكم وبالريكورد ده كل الزملاء اللي محتاجين حاجه زي كده. فشكرا دكتور ماسين، شكرا دكتور حسين، شكرا دكتور حبيب، شكرا دكتور محب، استاذه دكتور حسونه، شكرا جزيلا لحضرتك، وشكرا جزيلا للحضور الكريم، وجزاكم الله خيرا، ونشوفكم دايما على خير في الايام العلميه اللي جايه.